Hi everyone and welcome to CTO Craft Bytes. Feels very weird not just having a screen with floating heads, and it's the first time I've been holding paper in about 2.5 years, so please bear with me for this. Today we're discussing plotting the interim CTO path, so I hope you enjoy today's session. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit more about this group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists with their leadership growth. The community members are over 5,000, and CTO Craft provides one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events like this one. And as always, a huge thanks to our headline partner, AWS, for helping make these Bytes events possible. So as introductions, I'm Glyn Roberts. I'm CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt, and I'm moderating today's session. First, to my left, I've got David Mackey, who's the Director of Interim at Albany Partners. Welcome, David. Could you give us a short intro about yourself, please?
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm David. I've been doing recruitment in various guises for some years now across different sectors like finance and consulting and automotive. I've always had a tendency towards the contract or interim side of recruitment, but I got into executive search in the sort of startup scale-up ecosystem when I was working in Sweden. I met James earlier this year and found it very interesting that a firm with a reputation like Albany wanted to move into the interim and fractional sort of space. So I'm lucky enough now to be sort of leading our firm's charge into that area.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being here, David. And next is Alfonso Ferrandez. I'm always terrible with names. Fractional CTO and co-founder of UREGO. Welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me. Hi, I'm Alfonso. I've been fractional for a few years now. I've been I guess you call it full-time permanent CTO for many, many years. And across that, I've been working on from the tiniest startup to the likes of Amazon, Sony, etc. When I learned everything I learned over the last few years, I realized that actually I like to do all the stuff that a CTO does, but all the time, as opposed to how a CTO full-time does it, which is every 3 to 6 months you change from strategy to something else. And I loved all of it, and I missed doing it when I was focused on one area only. So I thought, the best way to do it is to find different companies that are at different stages with different challenges, and I can do a little bit of everything all the time. My brain works like that, so it was perfect fit. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And at the end, you've probably recognized the face from other webinars and other events that have been going on. Meri Williams, can't get away from her. She's an experienced CTO and NED, so welcome, Meri. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Meri. I sort of pendulum swing between full-time CTO gigs and then taking some time doing interim and fractional work. So this year I've been interim and fractional for a couple of different companies, Cardio and LabGenius, but I was previously CTO at Monzo, at Helix, at Moo. So I had an eclectic career and really don't appear quite as frequently as that intro made out. But on the side, I advise for Kindred, who are a seed stage VC here in London, and I'm the chair of the Lead Dev Conference that some of you may have come to in the past.
Excellent. So I've got a load of pre-seed questions just to get the core content out of these guys, but we will be opening up for questions for the audience as well. So as we get about halfway through, feel free to raise your hand. I'll call upon you to ask your question, and we'll see if we can help answer any of your questions. So for the first question then, Alfonso, let's start off with what are actually the differences between an interim and a fractional CTO?
So mostly the difference to me is the length of time you spend with a client, right? So an interim generally is either you're full-time or you're part-time, or you dedicate a solid number of days for that particular client. The fractional side, and I have a t-shirt printed, I didn't wear it today, but basically if you look at a calendar, it looks a little bit like a mosaic. So you have an hour here, an hour there for every client. So you're always available to your clients at all the time. You just organize your schedule that way. And it means that your brain is constantly context switching. It's not a daily thing, it's more like an hourly thing. So obviously not everybody likes context switching. So I think that the main difference is if you are into that extreme context switching, then fractional is preferred to interim. If you like having 1 or 2 clients on a part-time basis and then change challenges every few months, then interim is the way forward.
Excellent. Okay then, so Meri, what would you say are the use cases for hiring an interim or fractional CTO versus hiring a permanent CTO?
I think there's a few. So I'm starting to see quite a lot of businesses realize that it's going to take them a while to find their perm CTO, and putting somebody in as interim on a usually like 3 to 5 day a week basis whilst they're looking, because there's lots of CTOs who are on a 6-month notice, takes about 3 months to run a decent search, so you can be looking at 6 to 9 months without anybody at the helm in that kind of situation. The other thing I see at much smaller startups like the ones that I help coach through Kindred are folks who want some of that wisdom but can't really afford that they need a tech lead CTO in that early stage rather than somebody who's seen and scaled teams already, but they do want a bit of that organizational design help and bigger process type stuff, and that's quite loud. And so I think for that, you tend to see people taking more the fractional approach that may be on an interim basis or maybe much longer relationship, depending on what the business wants.
Sure. So the main thing is, as it takes so long to hire a CTO, as probably many of the people in the room here are CTOs themselves, it takes a long time to find the right people from that perspective. I mean, essentially come to David then. So obviously you work with organizations that are looking for CTOs. What are companies actually looking for when they actually say they want an interim or fractional CTO?
Well, if they figured out that they do want an interim or fractional CTO, then it usually relates to the type of use cases that Meri's just mentioned. I mean, an immediate resource to lean on during a search would be the obvious thing. I think, and then in an earlier stage company, we're talking about someone that when you perhaps don't need a full-time resource or you can't afford a full-time resource. But I almost think the most interesting part is where a CEO or founder hasn't necessarily come to the conclusion that they need a fractional or an interim. And that I think is where the conversation gets interesting. If you're actually going through the conversation of talking about hiring a perm, but are maybe then bringing to the table the option of bringing in an interim or fractional as an alternative. I think timing is absolutely key around the decisions that you make in this way. But and there definitely are times and situations where a permanent hire makes a lot of sense. But I think equally, there are times when a fractional or an interim might make even more sense. And I think that's an interesting angle to pursue. And I think that's part of this event is sort of raising awareness about the fact that this exists as a thing, and that there's a lot of collective wisdom and experience in the people that would consider interim and fractional work. And I think that it's not necessarily at the forefront of a founder or an investor's mind, and they think about and they come to us and discuss what they need.
Sure. So CEOs often don't know that this is an option for them, from your experience.
I think, I think, to a certain extent, it depends what stage the company's at. It also depends what their investors, what the backing, how that's made up. I think over the time that I've been discussing this, I think there's a definite trend towards private equity investors would definitely understand the interim and fractional value proposition a lot more readily. I think this is something that private equity companies would bring in and do. It's commonplace. Venture, maybe a bit less so. I think there tends to be more looking at things through the lens of permanent hiring. And I think that's where I'm particularly interested in sort of suggesting how maybe an earlier stage company who thinks they want to hire a permanent CTO at this point, maybe they're not ready for it, maybe they don't need it, maybe there are outcomes that they can get to sooner and more efficiently with someone who's bringing a lot of wisdom and experience, who's been on a similar journey before. I think that's where it gets really interesting.
The other thing I think we're starting to see a lot of the venture funds do is have us as tech advisors, and that you tend to be called an advisor, but in a lot of cases what you're doing is quite similar to fractional CTO work. If you're given a few companies in the portfolio to help look after through a scaling journey or similar, it can feel very similar to the kind of work that Alfonso does.
Sure. And obviously avoids the whole CTO being a coder at the same time, because you actually get the experience rather than just a senior developer. Okay then, so Alfonso, so obviously people in the room and myself, how do you know when you're actually ready for this type of role, and what are the first steps to become an interim or fractional CTO?
I think it's interesting. The words that both of them have mentioned is wisdom, right? It's very difficult to tell when you're wise enough to do it, but I think when you have enough experience and when you realize, and I think my realization moment was that I described before, when you actually have done everything, you know what you enjoy of your job, and you might not just want to do one slice of that job, you want to do them all. It's very difficult to do them all in the same job fairly regularly. You have to go through the stages. So if you get to that point, you actually find that you're getting, I wouldn't say bored, but you're getting you need more than what your permanent job is delivering. And the only way to achieve that is to probably, because a single company cannot deliver that, is to then actually go and seek multiple companies at multiple stages. It could be early startups, it could be transformation companies, it could be all sorts of things. That's the moment when you realize, I feel confident, I have enough experience to do all of this, I can help these companies, I can bring value. And I think one of the biggest things for me is that when you hire a fractional, you're paying for the value, you're paying for the impact. You're not paying for those other, 3 out of 5 days where a CTO might be, having chats with people or going to YouTube or whatever. You're paying for the impact. I'm not saying I did that when I was full-time one, but you're paying someone full-time and you're not getting full-time value, effectively. People go through waves and things. Whereas with a fractional, you will get, the 2 hours that you have in today, you will get 2 hours of value out of it and that wisdom. So if you think that that's what you want to do and that sort of impact you want to have in multiple companies, and particularly my interest is lots of different industries, I'm not focused on a particular vertical, and I think that's super exciting. If that's the sort of thing that you're keen on, I think fractional is definitely for you.
Sure. And Meri, was your way into interim fractional CTO work the same way?
So mine was a bit different. Because I'm an advisor for Kindred, a lot of the time my clients end up being part of the portfolio, and they, when they get to the point of wanting more than just an hour or two a month, sometimes they'll engage me on a equivalent of a day a week or equivalent of a couple of days a week kind of basis. I think we tend to both do more sort of fraction of full time. There is also a bunch of people who specialize in those full-time for 6 months or full-time for 9 months kind of gigs, which is also worth remembering. I think there's a couple of use cases for those, like the filling in until the perm CTO arrives is one of them. But the other is when there's a particular type of journey that's about to happen. So if you're going to triple the team in those 9 months, maybe the CTO who's needed after that is quite different to the CTO who's needed right now, and somebody to bridge that gap who's done it before, who maybe then won't stay and take the team from 200 to 500, but is very good at doing that 50 to 200 kind of stage. I think that's something that you see quite a lot as well.
Great. So, David, one of the most common things I see, especially on the CTO of Craft channel around interim work, is it's very difficult to find these types of roles. How do you recommend that people actually find these opportunities?
Well, in conversations I've had with people recently, I think there tend to be 3 main ways. I think, as Meri suggested, a relationship with an investor, with a portfolio is probably the number 1 way. If you can get in providing advice or doing some pieces of due diligence or analysis, pre-deal, post-deal, that kind of stuff, that will typically lead to more work if you're doing good stuff. I think the second way is the community itself. I think a lot of opportunities tend to be passed around between CTOs who know each other. They hear about things that might not be right for them or might not be the right time for them. And then I guess third, would be someone like me. Our objective is to generate a pipeline of work that is engaged either in an interim or fractional way. And sometimes that'll be, as I mentioned earlier, because founders and investors have decided that's the best way to go. I think other times it will be because we're having challenging conversations with our clients around what they really need, what are the options, what are the challenges and problems that they're looking to solve, and what would be the best way to achieve those. I think that's the exciting thing for us as a firm, is to be able to approach challenges at a client level without just always looking through the lens of permanent hiring. And that's the brilliant thing about interim and fractional, is that it offers such optionality and flexibility to how you can engage. Is it 1 day a week you need? Is it a full week you need? And as Alfonso made reference to, it's about value. You go in, you add value, you add impact, and the moment you stop doing that, you're not there anymore. And I think for many people who are making that transition, sometimes the link to your presence and value in a permanent job can develop a bit of a disconnect about that over time. But I think when you're engaging in this way, it's so obvious that you want to be delivering pretty much from day one, and for that to continue for the length of the engagement, and then you move on.
I think what you said, that the third way, which I call the education piece, right? Because a lot of people don't know it's a thing they can do, and they just said, oh, we need a CTO. And actually, they don't really need a CTO. They just need the wisdom or the expertise of someone to come and tell them what the right thing to do is. They might have a strong enough technical team, they just can't run it because they don't know what the next strategic step is, or whether the team is building the right thing, because the technical lead might be the most senior developer, but it's not necessarily someone who has vision or who has that experience of having done it many times over in different places. So to educate the CEOs and the investors and things on this is an actual, you can get that expertise when you need it and not on a permanent basis is actually quite important.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that you see is when somebody believes that the CTO they've got in place could develop into what they need, but they want someone to, like the CEO isn't necessarily the best place to develop them up in that way, so that they'll sometimes engage us as mentors or coaches for the in-place CTO to help kind of take someone who's maybe not seen quite as much and help them cope with what's coming next.
Sure. So it gives them an opportunity to be a CTO that can rise up to also match the new business needs, because obviously every 2 years or so organizations change, so therefore they get the benefit instead of saying they're useless, bring in a different CTO and they get gone. And
have all of the turmoil that causes with the team.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay then, so essentially for me, because this is a very more contractual piece of work, especially for you, for a question for you, Meri, what do you actually need to be an interim or fractional CTO? I'm thinking of things like contracts, insurance, accountants. Do you need to be set up as a corporation? How does this actually work in real life? Yeah,
I mean, from a liability point of view, it's smart to have a limited company and to be well insured. You're often making pretty big decisions that if there's, I've never been sued, but I'd certainly like having insurance just in case it ever happened, which is, I suppose the definition of insurance, isn't it? Before I did any of this kind of work, I got set up as a limited company with decent accountants. Highly recommend Maslin's if anybody wants a. We all like you talk to almost everybody. We all highly recommend Maslin's who sort of specialize in individual contractor type companies. And the other thing you need is to figure out whether you're inside or outside of IR35, which is this very annoying bit of technical accounting detail, but basically means whether you're going to get taxed as if you're an employee or not on the work that you do. So that's another reason that quite a lot of people have switched from being pure kind of full-time interims over into more fractional work, or having a broader spread of clients, is that it protects you better from IR35, which we could probably talk in the detail of that for an hour if we had to, but it's mostly just worth knowing to make sure you understand that and make sure you don't end up on the wrong side of the law in that regard, because you're looking at a very major tax difference if you end up retroactively being within IR35, right?
That's a scary concept. I think it's important, as a fractional particularly, that you do not line manage. Because if you line manage, you're an employee, you're actually running, the team. So you're advising, you're helping, you're mentoring, you're strategizing, you're telling the team what to do. So you're directing them as to what the next steps are, but you're not in charge of individual stuff, because then, IR35 becomes a bit of an issue.
That's a very interesting point. And what about with contracts with the organizations that you work with? Essentially, do you have your own templated contracts for the agreements in place, or do you work off theirs?
So I've tended to work off theirs and just seen if there's something egregious in there, then I just object to it and get it changed, which usually don't have much problem with, to be honest. I have got a couple of standard ones that I can use if a company's just never engaged a consultant before, but usually most companies these days either they or their investors have got a standard consulting contract that you can adapt for use for this kind of thing. I don't know if you do anything special with the fractional side of things.
I was a bit lazy, and I had one client that gave me a really good contract that was actually all favorable to me, so I really liked it, so I templatized it. And that's the one I use when the client doesn't have a contract, say, oh, I have one. This contract and SOW, and then you're pretty IR35 proof.
Should get a shared drive set up to.
Yeah, I've actually shared it with a few people because the new people into the fractional thing said, "Oh, do you have a contract?" And I always share it because I think it's important.
I think that's smart. I mean, the key thing lately about IR35 is, of course, the responsibility to decide whether you're inside or outside doesn't actually rest with you as a contractor anymore. It rests with the client, and we can't necessarily expect every client organisation to either understand or have really engaged with the legislation. So it's even more important for us to be able to know where we stand. I've seen situations where people have wanted to take a contract or interim outside IR35 and then present them with what is effectively an employment contract. So yeah, I always have an outside IR35 contract up my sleeve, and a bit of info around what this means to engage a business versus what it means to engage someone who's behaving like an employee. And that's essentially what we need to understand.
I mean, even things like proposals. So I wrote a proposal a couple of days ago for a potential client, and I was talking about myself, but I was talking about myself in third person, right? So I was saying we will offer our fractional CTO services or our fractional CTO representative or whatever. So that even the proposal doesn't mention individuals. It's just all about protecting yourself against that sort of little, you're not selling the person, you're selling the company.
It can sound like a bit of a minefield. There is now on GovUK a little wizard you can fill in, and HMRC have agreed that if you fill that in accurately, whatever answer it spits out, they will now be bound to, which is a major improvement on how it used to be. So if you're doing this for the first time, it's probably worth grabbing someone who's done a couple of these before and just get their help with that wizard, like check in on how you're setting it up. But it's gotten better than it was for a couple of years.
Because before it was a guideline, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Would you recommend that when you start off, you actually need a lawyer to help you with these things?
I didn't use one. I don't know. That's not a recommendation.
At your own risk, is that the answer?
So I suppose because I got into this in a slightly different way, I didn't feel the need for that, but I had a very warm relationship with a lot of the companies because I'd come in through the investor side. So I think if I think like the default safe answer is always yes, right? But I think quite a lot of people do this without one. When I was first doing interim work, actually, me and Skipper and Squirrel we were all three of us doing some interim stuff, and we would just pass clients to each other if we were too busy. And we, if you group up with people like that, it can be quite useful to share your templates, share your legal advice you've gotten, share your accounting approach and that kind of thing. So I think finding a couple of compatriots who've done something similar can be useful in that regard.
Cool. Right then, also for Meri first probably then, what should be expected to be paid? Should it be paid in cash, shares? How do you determine your value and your price to an organisation? Is it the same for everyone?
So I once famously got some advice that was if people don't, if the blood doesn't drain from someone's face when you name your rate, you're not charging enough, was one bit of pricing advice I got. I take a very flexible approach to this. So I've got a range of price points for different sizes of company and stages of company. I am open to having a mix of equity and cash, whereas I know that there's some folks who will only do either equity or cash, and that they have their own reasons for that being their rule. In terms of what actual rates look like, it probably starts at about $1,000 a day and goes up into the $5,000 a day kind of realm, depending on what size of client and what kind of interaction you're having. Check if the boys don't think I'm wildly off in my estimate.
I think it's important to be flexible. To effectively, if you think about a fractional CTO role in particular, you're creating a little bit of the portfolio the clients are creating, you're also creating a portfolio for your retirement fund, right? So you do want to be flexible in terms of equity and drop your day rate, get some equity for it and things, especially if you think the company has a product that is gonna take you there, is gonna deliver value. I'm lucky I have a couple of those, and I'm really keen to swap their day rate. Whereas other ones are, they're really in desperate need. They need help, so you go for the high day rate. Not necessarily equity because they don't really have potential for growth and things, but they want to survive and they want to keep the ship steady. So you have to be a little bit flexible, and the rates vary widely. If it's a massive enterprise versus, I don't do massive enterprise, but I imagine you can charge them huge amounts versus an early startup or a well-established company. The range is quite big.
I think there's some folks who do a kind of day rate kind of approach, but there's also folks who do more of I'm going to provide a huge amount of value to you. Give me let's negotiate what that value is worth to you and what the proportion of that you're going to pay me is. So I think you see people doing like a big program of work kind of arrangement. And then you also see people doing more of a day rate kind of arrangement. You have to be a little careful with day rate. We often end up talking in day rate terms, but you can end up with the IR35 issue of it feeling like you need a statement of work as well, and to be really clear on what the deliverables are to keep yourself clean IR35 wise.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's often difficult to fix price something, but to be squeaky clean from an IR35 perspective, if you can fix price and outcome, then that's a pretty good way to go. But I would say it's not essential. I would still feel very comfortable setting up an outside IR35 arrangement with a day rate, and that could be completely fine. But that's the thing about IR35. It's taking in all the details and considering them all together, and that's what makes it so complex. But in terms of the rate range that Meri mentioned, I'm not sure I've seen a $5,000 a day engagement yet. But no, I think.
Anybody? No.
But I think, it's absolutely right. It very much depends on what it is we're talking about, how long it's going to go on for, on what basis, and and so on. And I think we'd expect rates to flex up and down depending on those factors.
Sure.
Yeah, the top end I have seen but have tended to see where you've got someone who's often ex-Google or ex-Facebook, has seen really, really very significant scale and particularly unusual scale technical problems as well. And they'll be in the kind of $5,000 or £5,000 kind of range. But often come in and with the knowledge you have, help us solve this business killing problem we have, tends to be the thing that they're facing.
Sure. So you just break down your day rate into hours if it is fractional work where it's only an hour or two a week in those circumstances?
I do. I don't know what you do.
Yeah.
Do you like a minimum engagement? So you say that you have to pay X amount for engaging with me?
I don't, but to be honest, when it's small amounts, I tend to be doing that through the advisory work that I do with the VC anyway, so they're covering those hours. It usually depends on, for me, it depends on like what my capacity is and what kind of engagements I want to be doing at that time. So I've done everything from like, no, I don't do it unless it needs to be at least a couple of days a week, and I would only do 2 of them, through to, as long as it's something every month, then it's right. There are some people who operate in a kind of retainer model where you pay a retainer just to be around, to be available when asked, and then for the actual time that's used on top of that. That's not wildly unusual, actually.
Yeah, I think it gets tricky when I was saying the calendar looks like a bit of a mosaic, right? So if you get a client and say, well, we may need you for, it could be today, it could be like this week could be 2 hours, but next week could be 3 days. And it's very difficult to have 3 days available when you have, all this mattering things. So basically at that point, only recently I've started the retainer thing where you say, well, if you want a bare minimum of me, say like half a day a week, pay me for half a day a week, you use it, you've paid for it. If you don't use it, you've paid for it. But then if you go above and I have flexibility, I will give you more if I have it and you need it. So it sort of guarantees that I at least cut a slice on my calendar for these people, and then if they don't show up, they don't show up. But if they do show up, they know they have my attention. So it becomes quite tricky when it becomes really noisy. And the same, I have some engagements that I call ad hoc engagements. So you can give me a call if you need any questions, any technical questions that you need, validation, your CTO has told you something and you don't believe them, or whatever it is. Call me for an hour, and obviously the hourly rate is much higher than if it was a day rate, because it's like, they might be like not call you for a month or 3 months and then call you one day sort of thing. So that hour might be a $5,000 rate because it's only 1 hour. It's not, they're not going to call you a day's worth of calls that month.
Cool. Just before we move on from this, I'm interested around the shares approach. Is it always actual shares, or do you accept options where you may lose control?
Yeah, it tends to be whatever they've got in place for their employees. That tends to be the scheme that exists, and therefore what's available as a vehicle. I so far haven't seen anybody put like a different options approach in place specifically just for one advisor or one fractional or similar. So you tend to kind of fall in line with whatever the existing arrangement is.
Okay,
And
and
so
it's very hard to recommend what percentage you think you'd be deserving, depending on the size of the organisation and length of time and stuff.
Yeah, how much might this be worth? You're often discounting your day rate, so you want to be semi-convinced that it's worth whatever you're discounting by, but it's all very difficult to...
And there's no guarantee you're ever going to get anything back from that.
Yeah.
I mean, from David, from your standpoint with Albany, is this an issue for you if you are supporting people putting in place, and obviously there's not a wage piece in there with like commissions and stuff like that, and it's more share organisation. Is that an issue for you, or is that just a conversation you have with the company that you're dealing with? How does this work?
Well, I think it comes back to what Meri was saying. I mean, I think typically I've seen a day rate situation anyway, so that's not an issue. That's fairly easy to deal with. If there were shares or options involved, then the trick is to try and establish a value. And I'm not sure that we would ask for shares as part of our margin or commission, but if you establish the value of it and therefore what is the equivalent sort of day rate, then you just work from there. I don't see it as a big issue.
For some folks, they like if you, even if you don't necessarily discount your rate, sometimes they just like you having some skin in the game and believing in the future of the organisation. It gives them some additional confidence that the decision making you're doing on their behalf is in their best interests, because at the end of the day, if the company does well, you will as well. Some folks quite like you ending up on their cap table as well, depending on...
They can use that for marketing materials and investors' pitches.
Yeah.
Sure. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Hope you've enjoyed the session. Thank you, obviously, to David, Alfonso, and Meri for talking with us today. We'll probably be hanging around for a few minutes after anyway, so you can ask any questions you may not have got in. And obviously, any of you that are not part of CTO Craft, please check it out online. Thank you very much.
Sure.